You'd think winter meant silence, but in a Viking home, it meant smoke snoring and the squelch of mud where your floor used to be. I'm your bedtime historian, and tonight you're sleeping under a sagging turf roof with livestock in your hallway and smoke in your lungs. Welcome to the coziest misery ever designed. A curtain of breath-stealing haze clings low across the rafters. The fire's been burning since dawn, but not a wisp of smoke escapes upward. It just swirls, coughs, and sits. You're hunched beside a hearth that doubles as stove lantern and heater eyes watering as you sip sour milk. Why build homes like this? How did they tolerate the stench? And what did winter do to people who couldn't get away from it if the thought of steamy straw beds and fermented shark meat helps you doze off? Maybe give that like button a sleepy nudge. And if the smoke doesn't get to you, first feel free to subscribe for more. Ever wondered what kind of dreams survive best at 30 degrees? Leave a comment if you're listening from a cold place and tell me your historical cozy nightmare of choice. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your boots stick in the doorway. Not because there's anything wrong with the shoes, but because the doorway has over time become a sludgy little river of melt and muck. In this part of early Scandinavia, the first sign of winter isn't snow, it's mud. Relentless ankle-deep boot-sucking reputation, destroying mud that oozes across floors and seeps into bedrolls. You close the door behind you, and all warmth stops at your shoulders. Inside your Viking longhouse, things are only slightly better. The roof is made of thick sod, layered over wooden beams. It's good for insulation, but terrible for ventilation. With no chimney to speak of, smoke from the central fire has nowhere to go. It just lingers, saturating every hair follicle, every woolen tunic, and every tired lung. You sit low to the ground to breathe cleaner air, but there's only so much room. The fire burns on a lazy, smoldering mess of peat and damp twigs. A recent excavation of such homes found blackened rafters stained by years of soot buildup. One archaeologist referred to them as lungs turned upside down. Scholars still debate whether the design was intentional to keep warmth in or simply a byproduct of limited resources. Either way, it meant that winter began not with snowflakes, but with smoke. You're not alone in here. In fact, privacy is a fantasy. Dozens of family members, farm hands, and even animals crowd the shared space. Cows slosh around in the back stall, chickens shuffle underfoot, and someone's uncle is already snoring through his beard. The smell is indescribable, equal parts sour milk, singed hair, wet wool, and damp earth. If you aren't sneezing, you're sweating. And if you're not sweating, you're freezing. One quirky artifact discovered in a Viking midden heap suggests they lined their bedding with juniper branches, possibly for scent, possibly for bugs, possibly just for the ritual of it. There's no scholarly consensus. But you imagine it helps a little. In a corner near the door, someone's carving bone tools by firelight. The blade's edge glints for a moment, sharp against the smoke. You wonder how many winters this same act has repeated, how many stories have been mumbled in the dark, with nothing but embers and smoke for company. And then the wind howls. Outside, sleet pelts the roof like thrown stones. You tuck your hands into your armpits, curl deeper into your scratchy blanket of sheepskin and linen, and brace yourself. This is just the beginning. Winter hasn't even started being cruel yet. Time is soft now. The sun forgets to rise, or maybe it's just shy. In the half-light of a Viking winter days, shrink to the size of a whisper. And you, dear listener, lose track of where morning ends and memory begins. The sky, once a vivid blue, now hovers in a murky gray zone between dusk and dawn. You blink. Was that sunrise, or is the moon just pretending? With only a few hours of usable light, time itself feels unanchored. The rhythm of your day no longer comes from the sun, but from firelight and routine. You rise when someone stokes the hearth, and sleep when your eyes can no longer stay open. Clocks as we know them don't exist here. Even sundials are useless during these months. Instead, time is felt in the length of candle burnings, the number of chores done, or how far down the stew has cooked. Some scholars suggest the Norse organized their winter days not by hours, but by tasks the time it takes to card wool a full session of axe sharpening, or until the broth boils thick. You bundle into your tunic and fumble toward the door, stepping into the eerie stillness of midday that looks and feels suspiciously like midnight. The snow hasn't yet fallen, but the landscape is painted in frost, fuzzy outlines of fences, dull outlines of hills. Even the trees seem unsure of themselves. They've shed their leaves and now just wait. The world outside is a lightless canvas, and inside the fire is your only compass. It glows weakly in the center of the longhouse, radiating a warmth so faint it might be imagined. With so little sunlight, the body becomes confused. You nap, more often rise in the middle of the night, and hold long conversations while everyone else snores. The term for it today would be circadian disruption, but in this world, it's just life. Some Viking communities developed what researchers now call segmented sleep. You fall asleep after dinner, wake for a few hours in the middle of the night, perhaps to mend a sock talk to the gods or finish that carving and then sleep again until dawn, if dawn arrives at all. Historians still argue whether this pattern was deliberate, ritualistic, or simply a response to insomnia caused by constant darkness. The darkness changes you. It shrinks your thoughts inward. Your dreams become longer, stranger. You hear things, scraping noises, sighs in the walls, creaks that have names. One neighbor claims he met a draugr, a Norse spirit of the dead, when he woke during the second sleep. Another insists the shadows whisper, if you stay still long enough. Yet there is comfort here too. The slowness of time invites softness. You watch smoke curl upward for minutes. You run fingers over carved runes in the wall. You begin to notice how many shades of gray the world contains. Not everything needs to be hurried. Not everything needs to make sense. So, you sit quietly wrapped in wool, feeling your way through the fog of the season. Somewhere outside, the sky has begun to fade from pitch black to a slightly lighter black. Maybe it's morning, maybe not. But the fire still burns. You've swapped your sword for socks. Gone are the clinking rings of chainmail in their place wool. Endless, scratchy, sweaty wool. Welcome to the least glamorous part of the Viking wardrobe winter fashion, where survival outranks swagger. Dressing for a Scandinavian winter isn't about aesthetics. It's about not freezing to death before breakfast. You pull on layer after layer, a coarse linen shift, then thick woolen trousers, a long-sleeve tunic, a sleeveless overdress if you're lucky, and finally a heavy wool cloak, pinned at the shoulder with a brooch the size of a scone. You feel less like a warrior and more like a bundled cabbage. Some garments are lined with sheepskin or fleece, but most are made from homespun wool, hand-dyed in whatever plant-based pigment survived the autumn. Deep russets, mossy greens, and faded yellows dominate. Blues are rare and precious. You eye a neighbor's indigo-dyed cap with the same quiet jealousy reserved for firewood and second helpings. Footwear. Don't expect fur-lined boots. Instead, you wrap your feet in layers of cloth, then shove them into leather shoes that resemble soggy bread loaves. If you're lucky, someone stitched extra wool into the soles. If not, the frost creeps in with every step. And gloves, if you have them, are made from felted scraps, fingerless, and always slightly damp. The most vital winter accessory, a belt. Not for fashion, but for function. From it hangs a small knife, a pouch of salt, and maybe even a dried fish snack. Some scholars debate whether the belt had spiritual significance, linking your life to the tools that sustained it. Others say that's just modern over-romanticizing. Either way, without it, you're just wearing 15 pounds of fabric and hoping it doesn't fall off. Beards take on a whole new purpose in winter. They're not just status symbols, they're insulation. Men oil them with animal fat to keep them pliable in the cold. Frozen whiskers are no joke. More than one saga mentions a beard cracking like old ice after a trek through the snow. Even women, if old folk tales are to be believed, occasionally wore false beards during rituals or festivals, a curious detail scholars still puzzle over. Headwear is non-negotiable. Wool caps with ear flaps, fur-lined hoods, or tightly wrapped scarves keep the heat from escaping through your skull. Children are bundled like turnips in layers so thick they can barely move. One artifact, a carved wooden doll found in a fjordside village, wears a tiny replica of this very outfit. Was it a teaching tool? A child's toy? No one knows. But it wore a hat. Despite all this effort, you're rarely warm. The clothes itch. They trap sweat. They smell like damp sheep and whatever was cooked last over the fire. But they work, barely. Each stitch is a small defiance against the wind that bites through door frames and under sleeves. Fashion statements. You've got none. But you do have frostbite-free toes for now. And in the flickering firelight, everyone looks the same, swaddled silhouettes in smoky hues, too bundled to tell farmer from fighter. In winter, identity blurs beneath wool. Nature calls and you answer, but not without consequence. The latrine is outside, the wind is sharp, and your beard, it's already freezing into icicles. Welcome to the least dignified danger of Viking winter, the bathroom break. You shuffle to the door, swaddled in so many layers that you resemble a walking bale of hay. But layers don't protect you from what's coming. As soon as the door creaks open, the cold hits like a slap, raw, immediate, and everywhere at once. You crunch across the frozen mud to a humble wooden shed, if your household even has one. Some simply use a trench behind the longhouse. The Viking toilet, if that's what we're calling it, is more of a hole in a plank perched over a pit. No seat, no insulation, and absolutely no privacy when the wind decides to visit. You brace yourself, clutching the edges of the rickety structure as frost nibbles at everything not covered in wool. You try not to imagine what would happen if you slipped. Scholars still debate whether these latrines were used year-round or if families designated indoor chamber pots during extreme weather. Fragments of clay pots have been found near hearths, possibly suggesting they were kept close to warm fires. But one thing is certain, if you needed to go, and it was 30 below, your options weren't good. Even worse, the return trip. By now, your breath has turned to needles, and your beard has stiffened into a crystalline sculpture. Viking men, knowing this routine all too well, sometimes rubbed their facial hair with fish oil or bear fat before venturing out. The grease created a barrier not for warmth, but for flexibility. A frozen beard might snap or tear at the skin. You tug at your own as you re-enter the longhouse, wincing at the crackle. One 13th century saga mentions a man whose mustache froze to his mead cup. Whether exaggeration or parable, it speaks to a very real truth. The cold makes fools of everyone. Even the fiercest warriors become bumbling, sniffling messes when nature targets their nostrils. Inside, you kick off your soaked boots, careful not to splatter the fire with melted snow. The others nod knowingly, no need to ask where you've been. Everyone shares the same dread of those nighttime trips. Children are taught to hold it. Elders, they don't even try. More than one family constructs makeshift pails stuffed with straw or ash for use during the longest nights. There's also a curious tradition noted in a few Norse settlements, the snow scoop. Essentially a carved wooden ladle kept near the entrance to scoop snow for cleaning purposes. Researchers continue to debate whether it was ceremonial, hygienic, or both. Either way, it's cold comfort when you're trying to wash your hands with what amounts to shaved ice. So, next time you grumble about chilly bathroom tiles, think of your Viking ancestors huddled in an outhouse with the wind howling through their tunics. And be grateful your plumbing doesn't freeze to your face. The warmest thing in your house isn't a blanket or fire, it's a pig. Not metaphorically, literally. Tonight you sleep beside a snorting, snuffling, occasionally farting heat source that used to live in a sty. Welcome to the strange intimacy of indoor livestock. You lie down near the hearth already wrapped in layers of wool fleece and wishful thinking. But even that isn't enough. The fire flickers, but the cold seeps in through cracks in the timber walls and the earthen floor beneath you. Your breath fogs the air. Somewhere above the roof creaks under a new layer of frost. So, what's the Viking solution? Bring the animals inside. Cows, pigs, goats, and chickens were not just property, they were space heaters. Viking longhouses were designed with this in mind. On one end, the family sleeps and eats. On the other, a pen for the animals. The thin wooden partition does nothing for smell, but everything for warmth. Their body heat raises the interior temperature by several degrees, a life-saving boost in midwinter. Some houses had a slightly sunken animal area, allowing dung to accumulate without spilling into human space. But that was an ideal. In reality, there was slop. There were hoof sounds at night. There were smells. One saga makes a passing reference to sour breath and heavy warmth, possibly describing the sensation of sleeping next to a cow's nostrils. Scholars aren't sure whether this was praise or complaint. The pig in particular is both a blessing and a curse. Its body heat is impressive. Pigs can raise the ambient temperature in a small room just by lying in it. But they're also noisy and curious. You once woke to find one chewing on your boot. Chickens, meanwhile, wander freely pecking at crumbs and flapping onto low beams. It's like living inside a barn with no rules. There's a certain rhythm to the chaos. You grow used to the clatter of hooves and occasional moo during the night. Children sometimes sleep pressed up against a sheep for warmth. Adults carve out little corners with straw barriers to claim some illusion of privacy. A goose honks in its sleep. No one flinches. It's not without risk. Illness spreads easily in shared quarters. Some researchers point out that zoonotic diseases may have emerged or worsened due to this kind of proximity, yet the trade-off frostbite or fever was often worth it. In a world without insulation or central heating, pigs and cows were the best furnace you could afford. You wake in the middle of the night to a soft, rhythmic snoring. It's not your uncle this time, it's the cow. Her breath steams in the firelight. You pull your cloak tighter and watch her tail twitch as she dreams probably of summer grass. The longhouse is quiet now, just crackling logs, the occasional rustle of feathers, and the shared warmth of beings trying together not to freeze. Civilization at its coziest and most chaotic. Dinner smells like low tide and regret. You lift the lid of a wooden barrel and are instantly greeted by something that might once have been shark, but now smells like old vinegar soaked in ammonia. Welcome to Hey Carl, the Viking winter delicacy no one asked for. Stored deep in the back of the longhouse away from curious pigs and sensitive noses is the fish larder, and larder might be too generous a word. It's a pile of barrels each filled with fermented ocean life preserved in salt ice, and its own natural juices. This is where you find hakarl, a Greenlandic shark so poisonous when fresh that it has to rot before it's safe to eat. Vikings didn't invent the dish for fun. They discovered it through desperation. Shark meat was plentiful along northern coasts, but the toxins made people violently ill until someone realized that burying the flesh in gravel and snow for several weeks, then hanging it to dry, made it edible. Not tasty, just survivable. You lift a strip of hakarl to your mouth. It's translucent rubbery and smells like a forgotten cleaning product. One bite and your sinuses sting. It's not rotten in the way meat spoils, it's rotten in the way philosophy is spoiled by endless debate. Children are taught to chew it slowly. No one enjoys it, but everyone eats it. Some even pretend to like it, especially in front of visiting traders. The most surprising part? It works. Haycarl keeps for months without refrigeration. Its strong smell repels most pests, including some humans, and its intense saltiness provides a calorie-dense, protein-rich meal when all else fails. There's a Viking proverb rarely quoted outside the North that roughly translates to better to cry over fish than hunger. Some archaeologists have argued that Hakarl may have had ceremonial importance, perhaps served at winter feasts or sacrifices. Others believe that's wishful thinking. More likely, it was the food of last resort, consumed in silence with tight jaws and even tighter nostrils. You chase the bite with a swig of watered-down mead, hoping to banish the taste. It doesn't work. The aftershock lingers. Someone next to you chuckles softly, offering a second strip with mock generosity. You accept. You always accept. Refusing food in winter isn't just rude, it's foolish. Not all winter fare is as punishing. There are pickled onions, dried berries, smoked lamb, and thick barley porridge when supplies are good. But Hakarl endures as the emblem of cold season cuisine, difficult, stubborn, unforgettable, just like the people who eat it. Outside, the wind howls again. Inside, a second barrel is opened. The children groan. The elders sigh. You chew mechanically, eyes watering, and dream of spring, when even raw oysters would feel like a luxury. But for now, this is nourishment. This is tradition. This is Viking winter on a plate. And in some strange, salty way, you're grateful for it. The snow is beautiful until it seals your food underground. It muffles the world, sure, but also locks away the barrels, the cellars, the hidden pits where winter meals were supposed to wait patiently. This is the Viking dilemma of the ice famine. You awaken to silence, not the usual cozy kind that follows a long night by the hearth, but a thick, unsettling quiet that comes after heavy snowfall. Stepping outside, you realize why the entire landscape is entombed in ice. The snowdrifts stretch high against the walls of the longhouse, swallowing paths and fences. The storage pit is somewhere beneath that white mountain. Good luck finding it. The Vikings stored food in underground pits, animal hide bags, and sealed barrels kept in snow-cooled sheds. But when snow falls too fast or freezes into solid sheets, access vanishes. You find yourself staring at a smooth, unbroken field of ice, wondering if the fish you packed away last month is still reachable, or if it now belongs to the frost. Some families build tall markers over their storage using wooden posts or carved stones to remember locations. But even these can vanish in the whiteout. You shovel, you curse, you chip at frozen ground with your knife hilt, and sometimes you fail. Supplies are lost, spoiled, or simply unreachable until thaw. The irony stings surrounded by snow and still going hungry. In especially harsh winters, entire communities shift their diet to whatever's left. Indoors, grains, dried meats, and the occasional root vegetable if they have held up. But when even that runs low, they turn to bark. Yes, bark. Stripped from pine or birch trees, it's boiled, scraped, and ground into something resembling porridge. It's not flavorful, it's barely digestible, but it fills the belly. Researchers have unearthed remnants of bark bread in ancient refuse heaps. Some theorize it was mixed with ash or straw to create a rough, dense loaf. There's no consensus on whether it was nutritious or just tolerated. One thing's clear, it wasn't a delicacy. When things got truly dire, rumors of food theft emerged, not from neighbors, but from spirits. The Norse believed in huldafolk, hidden people who might steal your stores if you didn't honor them properly. Offerings of mead or a sliver of meat were sometimes left on windowsills to appease them. Whether this was superstition or a way to rationalize scarcity, no one knows for sure. The day stretches on. You and a few others dig until your hands blister. You uncover one corner of a storage barrel, its lid iced shut. Inside, if the frost hasn't cracked, the wood, lies salted herring. Maybe enough for dinner. Maybe not. Back indoors, the mood is quieter than usual. No one mentions the missing supplies. Children are fed smaller portions. Adults chew slower. The fire crackles with less cheer. But no one complains. Complaining wastes energy. And in a Viking winter, energy is everything. You look out the narrow window at the wall of white and think it's not the cold that kills. It's the way it hides your food. You scratch, again, and again, and again. It's not just you, everyone's scratching. Lice, fleas, mites, and something that might be a beetle are all enjoying the Viking winter as much as you are. Welcome to bedtime in the age before pest control. The bedding situation in your longhouse seems cozy at first glance. Straw mattresses, woolen blankets, and furs stacked 3 layers deep. But beneath the surface literally is a thriving micro-empire of bugs. The straw is fresh as of last autumn, but it's already broken down into damp clumps perfect for tiny stowaways. You lie down and feel it a tickle behind your knee, then your scalp, then somewhere less polite. Vikings did their best to fight back. Bedding was regularly aired out on the rare sunny days, and occasionally sprinkled with ash or herbs like yarrow and tansy believed to repel insects. But it was a losing battle. In winter, when even the air inside is too cold to breathe deeply, there's no real escape from the crawlies. You scratch in silence, trading knowing glances with your neighbor. No shame, just mutual suffering. Children especially become battlegrounds. With their softer skin and tendency to roll around in their sleep, they are prime targets for lice. Mothers are often seen gently nitpicking by firelight, muttering curses and old rhymes meant to shame the bugs into leaving. One fragment of a lullaby, preserved in Icelandic oral tradition, sings to a flea queen to take her court elsewhere. Scholars debate whether this was symbolic or a desperate plea. Then there are the bed bugs, small flat reddish monsters that hide in the seams of your wooden sleeping box and emerge at night to bite ankles and forearms. You wake with rows of tiny welts and a powerful urge to sleep standing up. It doesn't help that the furs you cling to for warmth, sheepskin reindeer, hide even wolf pelts if you're lucky or rarely cleaned. Parasites love them as much as you do. The most unfortunate part, you grow used to it. It becomes part of the nightly rhythm. Scratch, turn, scratch again. Some folks place herbs under their pillows. Others claim sleeping with a knife under your mattress wards off bed spirits. It doesn't. But at least the blade gives you something to hold when the itching wakes you at 3 a.m. Archaeological digs in Norse settlements have uncovered combs, dozens of them made of antler or bone, often finely toothed. These weren't just for vanity. They were tools of war against lice, carried everywhere hung from belts even buried with the dead. One particularly well-preserved comb from a Swedish grave bore the runic inscription, "Against the little ones." Whether meant as a joke or grim truth, it says enough. Eventually your body adapts. The itching fades to a dull annoyance. The creatures are never gone, but you learn to share space like roommates who overstay their welcome but pay in body heat. You pull the blanket up to your ears, ignore the twitch in your sock, and try to dream of spring, when maybe the bugs will take a vacation. Playtime, but with sharp edges. When Vikings needed to shake off cabin fever, they didn't grab a ball, they grabbed axes. Winter games weren't just fun, they were practice for the next raid. You step outside into the biting wind, clutching your cloak tight, but there's a strange energy in the air. After days cooped inside the smoky longhouse, tempers fray and boredom festers. It's time to move, to challenge, to compete. Someone shouts a challenge across the snowy yard, and within minutes the games begin. These aren't innocent snowball fights. Instead, it's shield tag, where children and teens hurl wooden shields at one another, trying to knock opponents down without actually drawing blood. Or so they say. The rules are flexible. The goal stays sharp, literally. Viking winter games were both entertainment and subtle military training, teaching speed accuracy and a taste for controlled aggression. You join a match of natalaker, a kind of brutal proto-hockey played with a hard wooden ball and curved sticks. There are no goal lines, no time limits, just chaos. Someone's knee gets smacked, someone else loses a mitten, a third gets tackled into a snowbank and comes up laughing beard filled with ice. Historians debate the exact rules of Knataliker. Saga references describe games that last for hours or even days, with teams sometimes turning violent. One tale tells of a man whose arm was broken during play. He then got up and finished the match. Whether this was sport ritual or just unregulated testosterone is still unclear. For younger children, simpler games fill the time, wrestling matches tug of war with braided ropes, or spinning bone dice carved with tiny runes. Even those had their darker sides. Some of the runes reportedly invoked gods or cursed opponents. Nothing says playdate like a tiny prayer to Thor that your friend slips on ice. Adults join in too, especially during festivals. Axe-throwing contests were common targets painted on logs or hung from trees. Accuracy mattered more than strength. You test your aim hurling the axe toward a painted bullseye. It thunks in, just shy of the center. Close enough to earn a grunt of approval, far enough to inspire some sarcastic muttering. Even indoor games had a martial flair. Hanafataful, a strategic board game, mimicked battlefield maneuvers with king's guards and attackers. Played beside the fire during blizzards, it kept the mind sharp. Some players even carved the game into wooden planks that doubled as shields, training both strategy and arms. Why so much emphasis on fighting in winter? Because this was the off-season. Raiding paused, farming halted, ships were frozen in harbor. But muscle memory doesn't take holidays. So the games continued, not just to entertain, but to prepare. You wipe snow from your brow, catch your breath, and rejoin the game. Someone's calling for round 2, and the rules are evolving. Again. But that's the Viking way fight first, sorted out later. In the distance, the sun dips behind gray clouds. Time for one more match before supper. Steam does rise, but not from relaxation. This isn't a spa, it's a smokehouse, and you're standing ankle-deep in soot and salted meat. Forget everything you've seen about cozy Nordic saunas. This is what real Viking heat feels like. You duck your head beneath a low beam and enter the side hut attached to the longhouse. Immediately your eyes water. Not from emotion, but from the thick, greasy smoke that coils downward instead of rising, clinging to your hair and eyebrows. The smell. A pungent mixture of fish oil, damp straw, charred wood, and something vaguely sour that you hope isn't rat. This is the smokehouse, not a luxury, but a necessity. Inside hang dozens of slabs, fish lamb, even bits of seal, all suspended from wooden rods like meaty wind chimes. A fire smolders beneath its heat, not high enough to cook, but just strong enough to dry and preserve. You step carefully. The floor is slick with fat drippings and ash. The misconception of Viking saunas comes from later traditions, particularly among the Finns and Estonians, where bathhouses were social, spiritual, and often steamy in a nice way. Viking smokehouses, however, were strictly functional. There's no bathing here, no scented birch branches, just work. You're not unwinding, you're monitoring the airflow so the food doesn't turn green. Scholars continue to debate whether Vikings had true sauna-like spaces during this era. A few archaeological finds hint at heated stone rooms used for washing, perhaps even for sweat rituals. But most homes relied on heated buckets, cloths, and cold water splashed from a trough. Cleanliness was relative. Soot was constant. Your task today, rotate the racks. The side facing the wall gets too little smoke, and the pieces near the fire risk drying too fast. You prod the meat with a charred stick, flipping a fillet that hisses as residual fat hits the coals. The noise is oddly satisfying, almost musical in the quiet of the hut. Someone enters behind you grunting a greeting. No words needed, just shared coughing as the smoke thickens. You both cover your mouths with bits of wool and keep working. This isn't punishment, it's preservation. Without this room, winter hunger wins. A curious side effect of this setup is that your clothing, already woolen, already damp, is now smoked too. Everything you own smells faintly of jerky. You carry the scent like a badge. It seeps into your blankets, your beard, even your dreams. One saga mentions a man so infused with smoke that ravens followed him around. Myth or mosquito repellent, hard to say. When the work is done, you step back out into the cold. The air hits like a slap, icy clean, nearly tasteless. For a moment, your lungs remember what unsmoked oxygen feels like. You cough once just to mark the contrast. Then you return to the longhouse, the scent of herring and lamb trailing behind like a hungry ghost. This isn't leisure, it's survival and the heat. It doesn't come with eucalyptus. Snow days not for Viking kids. While modern children might bundle up for sledding or call it a day at the first snowflake, young Norse boys and girls were out feeding goats, hauling ice, and keeping fire embers alive all before breakfast. The sun isn't up yet, barely even trying, but the children are. You hear their muffled grunts as they tug frozen buckets across the packed snow, their little boots soaked from slush that never seems to melt. There's no school to skip, no structured break from labor. In Viking society, children were small workers with even smaller voices. The youngest start with fire duty. Overnight, the hearth dims to orange coals. It's their job to fan the embers before the adults rise, coaxing flame back to life, using dry moss and their breath. It's a delicate task. Too much air, and you snuff it. Not enough, and everyone wakes up cold and cranky. Next, it's animal care. Even in the dead of winter, livestock need food and water, though the water first has to be chipped from an icy trough. Children break through the crust with small axes or stones, careful not to splash themselves in the process. Frozen sleeves mean scoldings later. Inside, others get to work repairing the longhouse itself. The roof leaks, always. Thatch sections need patching, and that means climbing up with straw bundles and animal dung for insulation. Yes, dung. Mixed with mud, it seals surprisingly well. But hauling it up a ladder in minus 15 degrees. That's childhood. Girls and boys alike help with textile tasks, carding wool, twisting yarn, even weaving when skilled enough. A lopsided mitten still counts if it's warm. And during spinning, they sing. Rhythmic droning songs passed down from grandmother to child, designed to keep little fingers moving. Some songs are silly. Others tell cautionary tales of what happens when lazy children let the fire die. Researchers have noted how Viking grave goods for children often include tools, tiny knives, spinning whirls, even fishing hooks. Not toys. Tools. This suggests that participation in household labor began early and was seen as a point of pride. To be useful was to be valued. To be idle was, well, you wouldn't be idle long. That's not to say play was absent. It just blended with work. A child chasing a chicken was both feeding the family and practicing agility. Wrestling in the snow helped develop strength for future battles. Even storytelling served a function, teaching values, sharpening memory, and staving off frostbite-induced boredom. You watch a little girl stitch up a hole in her cousin's cloak. Her fingers are red raw at the knuckles, but her expression is calm, focused. She hums softly as she works. No complaints, just thread and frost. There's a toughness here, not brutal, but inevitable. Winter demands it, and childhood bends to meet the cold. So the next time you think kids have it hard today, picture them on a frozen roof with a sack of straw and a bucket of dung, and be glad your chores came with gloves. You smear lard under your arms and pray it doesn't freeze. The wind cuts sharper than any blade, and wool alone won't save you. This is Viking winter chemistry, fire, fat, and fleece, the ancient formula for not dying of cold before dawn. The first layer is knowledge. You've learned by now that staying warm isn't about just piling on clothes, it's about trapping heat and fighting moisture. You begin with a thin linen shift, then wrap your torso in 2 layers of woven wool. Over that comes the lard animal fat, slightly rancid but surprisingly effective. Smeared across the chest, thighs, and even toes, it creates a barrier between your skin and the numbing air. Lard holds heat. It also stinks. But so does everyone else. In Viking households, smelling like a smoked ham dipped in goat butter is practically a fashion statement. Children are greased up like roast chickens before heading out to help with chores. Even elders partake, though some refuse to admit it, claiming they built warmth through stubbornness. Researchers remain divided on how common fat layering really was. Some argue that references in sagas and burial finds suggest widespread use. Others think it may have been reserved for extreme conditions or ritual preparation for long journeys. Either way, the practice persists in oral tradition and in your morning routine. The second part of the equation, wool. Not just any wool, but lanolin-rich, water-resistant wool from native sheep breeds. It doesn't just insulate, it breathes. You wrap a long woolen band around your waist and chest, adding thickness without bulk. Mittens made of felted wool, sometimes doubled, protect your hands. Scarves are wrapped tightly under the nose, where your breath collects and freezes into tiny icicles. Then comes fire. Not just the hearth in the longhouse, but personal fire. Small embers are kept in portable clay pots, hand warmers of a kind. You carry one in your cloak, careful not to spill hot ash onto your sheepskin. Some households even use heated stones wrapped in cloth, placed at the foot of beds or inside boots. They cool fast, but for the first few minutes, they're glorious. Clothing isn't tailored exactly, it's engineered. Wool trousers are layered with woven bindings around the calves. Tunics are cinched with belts not just for fashion, but to keep layers close to the body. Some clever soul even invented wool ear tubes, tiny conical hats that loop around the ears like funnel-shaped earmuffs. When all else fails, you add people. Sleeping alone is foolish. Viking families pile together on shared beds, creating a bundle of limbs and breath and heat. One saga mentions a winter so fierce that 3 adult men, 2 goats, and a sleeping child had to share one blanket. You believe it? You finish dressing lard, stiffening in the cold air. You look like a walking hay bale with a faint shimmer, not elegant, but effective. The wind claws at your face, but your body stays warm. Wool, fire, and fat, the holy trinity of Norse survival. When the fire dies, everything else follows. It doesn't just mean cold toes, it means no light, no food, no safety. And when the embers fade too far, you may find yourself sleeping in a pile of bodies just to survive the night. The fire has gone out. You don't know when. Maybe in the early hours while the coals still looked alive. Maybe while you were dreaming of spring. Either way, the hearth is dark and the cold has already crept in. It moves fast, climbing up fingers, down necklines, into joints. You wake shivering your breath, coming out in frantic, shallow puffs. Reviving the fire isn't just inconvenient, it's an emergency. Someone leaps up grabbing dried moss and the precious slivers of bark saved for such a moment. A spark, a flicker, nothing. Again. The air feels like ice water. You clutch your cloak and pray the fat you smeared on your chest earlier holds its line. Vikings knew how to handle cold, but when the fire failed, even the toughest among them panicked. Without it, there's no cooking, no thawing water, no signal to the gods through chimneyless smoke, and most importantly, no heat to fend off the kind of cold that numbs fingers in minutes and lungs in half the time. You huddle with the others. Children are lifted into the center of the room, wrapped in furs and pressed between adults. There's no room for modesty now, just body heat. The living become insulation. Someone lies down beside you, an elder whose breath rattles with each exhale. Another presses their back against yours. It's awkward but comforting, like animals in a den. In some sagas, winter fires are sacred. A line passed down from a grandmother to her grandchildren says, "Guard the flame like your last breath." And this night, you understand why. Scholars have found layered sleeping pits in ancient Norse homes, shallow depressions lined with straw and surrounded by warm bodies. Not burial grounds, survival nests. There are stories, whispers really, of people who froze in their sleep, despite layers, despite walls, despite the whole family packed together. Sometimes they just stopped shivering and never started again. Outside, snow taps against the roof like fingernails. Inside, silence, except for the soft rustle of limbs adjusting the occasional snore and the persistent whisper of someone still trying to light the fire. Sparks rise, but nothing catches. You don't dare close your eyes. Eventually, someone remembers the firestone, kept in a covered pot near the animal stall, preserved coals from yesterday, still faintly alive. It's a desperate gamble. You help carry it over breath held. A puff of air, a pinch of moss, a shaking hand, a glow. Tiny, but real. Within minutes, warmth begins to crawl back into the room like an old friend. Blankets are shifted, limbs relax. A pot of water is hung back over the flame. And for the first time that night, you believe you might make it to morning. The fire is alive, and so are you. You'd think Yule meant joy, and it does sort of. But beneath the feasting and laughter, Viking midwinter celebrations were less about merry cheer and more about surviving the darkest days with stories, bones, and mead that burns going down. The solstice nears, and everyone feels it. Nights stretch long like shadows on a cold wall, and the sun becomes a rumor more than a presence. That's when Yule begins not as a party, but as a reckoning, a line in the snow dividing the half of winter you've endured from the half still to come. Preparations begin days in advance. Wood is stacked high, not just for warmth, but for ritual fires. The mead, carefully brewed in autumn, is brought out in clay jugs. Dried meats are arranged on wooden platters. Bones cleaned and carved with tiny runes are passed around the fire. You carve one yourself, a little crooked, meant to ward off frost spirits or bad dreams. Maybe both. Feasting begins at sundown and continues deep into the long black night. There's no turkey, no stuffing, just what you've managed to keep from spoiling smoked fish, barley porridge, pickled turnips, and fatty cuts of lamb that glisten in the firelight. It's not much, but it's more than you've had in weeks. Tonight, hunger takes a holiday. You drink deeply not to forget, but to remember. Each toast is a story. The man who outran a bear. The girl who sailed during a snowstorm. The ancestor who legend says tricked a troll by pretending to be deaf and blind. The line between myth and memory blurs after the second cup. Children play with bones, the carved ones, and the real ones tossing them like dice or stacking them into tiny towers. Some elders mutter that it brings luck. Others say it invites ghosts. Scholars still debate whether these games were symbolic or simply practical toys for bored kids with strong stomachs. There's music too. A lyre strums softly in the corner, joined by low chanting. Not the jolly carols of later centuries, but deep looping verses meant to stir the air and please unseen watchers. Some families invite a skald, a poet to recite from sagas by firelight. Their voice rises and falls like the wind pulling everyone into tales older than memory. Then come the Yule logs, giant stumps dragged into the hearth and set alight. They're supposed to burn through the night. If the fire dies before dawn, it's a bad omen. You watch the flames closely, willing them to stay strong. At the edge of your vision, a carved goat made of straw and bound with red thread sits near the wall. It watches too. Yule isn't about comfort. It's about defiance. A declaration that despite everything, the frost, the hunger, the aching cold, you are still here, still laughing, still chewing dried fish while wrapped in 6 layers of itchy wool. As the night deepens, the fire crackles and stories fade into silence. You lean against the wall, belly full head, buzzing and whisper, thanks to whatever spirit kept your fire lit and your toes intact. Halfway there. It's still frozen outside, but the air smells different, like hope thawing under the snow. The days are stretching barely, and inside your chest stirs something ancient and impatient. Not joy, not relief, something sharper. Spring is coming, and with it, the sea. The first sign isn't green shoots or bird song. It's drip. A slow rhythmic tapping from the eaves as snow begins to weep. Icicles thin, mud returns, and that awful stench of thawing things, old fish trampled hay, forgotten leather, rises like a ghost. But to your Viking senses, it smells like freedom. You feel it before you see it. A tug in your bones, an itch under your fingernails. For months you've been trapped by frost and smoke, your world reduced to shadows and straw. Now, the edge of the ice begins to retreat, and the sea, your true restless home, starts to beckon from beyond the fjord. Raiding season draws near. This doesn't mean pillaging is around the corner, not yet. First come repairs. You and others begin the sacred ritual of checking the boats, longships slumbering beneath tarps, half frozen where they were dragged ashore last autumn. The wood is weathered, the ropes stiff, but nothing's broken that can't be mended. The sea waits, patient, inevitable. Your fingers are clumsy with cold, but you work anyway, rubbing seal oil into oar handles, twisting fresh flax into cord. You hum as you work. So does your neighbor. The tune isn't joyful exactly. It's hungry, eager. Every knot tied is a promise. Soon you'll be somewhere else. Children play nearby, but even their games have changed. They no longer wrestle by firelight or toss carved bones in the straw. Now they march in little rows, balancing sticks like spears, imitating the sea warriors they'll one day become. Even the goats seem more alert, as if the scent of salt has reached their snouts. The elders notice it too. They sit quietly sipping thin mead, watching preparations with knowing eyes. Most won't sail again, but their memories do. You catch fragments of their conversations, names of distant ports, storms survived, scars earned. One mutters that he dreamed of gulls last night. A good sign. You take a break near the bluff, overlooking the ice-choked inlet. It's still white, still frozen, but the horizon looks different, less cruel. The sun lasts an hour longer than it did a fortnight ago. Soon the ice will crack, then it will break, then you will leave. Some scholars believe this shift, the psychological turning point between Yule and thaw, was the most spiritually charged time of the Norse year. Not just hope, but rebirth, a sacred restlessness. Others argue it was simply practical, prepare now or starve later. The truth as always is somewhere in the mist between poetry and logistics. You rise, stretch, and return to the boat. There's much to do before the water moves again. But For the first time in months, your breath no longer curls out like a ghost. It escapes like a prayer, and beneath your feet, the earth no longer crunches. It squelches. The thaw brings more than travel. It also brings the urge to shed winter's residue, to scrape away the soot of fire-lit months and re-emerge lighter, cleaner. Not just your ship needs care. Your body does too. It's early morning, and fog curls over a fjord like steam rising from a cauldron. You step quietly toward a shallow depression in the earth, rimmed with stones, still warm from last night's fire. It's not a bathhouse in the Roman sense, no marble columns or mosaics, but it serves the same purpose. Welcome to the Viking log, a primitive yet purposeful steam bath, where warriors and farmers alike came to cleanse, think, and socialize. There is no soap here, at least not in the modern sense. Instead, the heat does most of the work. Fire-heated stones are rolled into the pit, where water is ladled over them to release thick aromatic steam. You crouch low as the air begins to shimmer, sweat beading on your brow almost instantly. That sweat, in fact, is part of the ritual. It forces out grime, clears your pores, and starts the process of purification. What's quirky here is how unremarkable all of this seems to your fellow bathers. Nakedness, perfectly normal. Grunting old warriors in a circle of heat. That's just Saturday. The Norse considered bathing a social act, not a private one, an essential part of being seen as trustworthy and honorable. Some even conducted political meetings or marriage negotiations while sitting in the steam. Archaeological sites across Scandinavia hint at how common these setups were. Traces of fire pits, scorched stones, and wooden trenches suggest both indoor and outdoor bath zones. There's scholarly disagreement, of course, about how widespread or standardized these structures were. Some argue they were improvised village by village, while others believe they followed a shared cultural blueprint. As steam thickens and your skin begins to tingle, a fellow bather hands you a bundle of birch branches. Not for beating, not yet, but for releasing fragrant oils. You haven't even begun to cleanse, and already the Viking way of bathing feels more therapeutic than you expected. Steam still clings to your hair as you wrap a woolen cloak around your shoulders and step outside. But just as your skin begins to cool, a strange word drifts through your memory, lagerdager. It's Old Norse, and it translates literally to bathing day. Not a poetic nickname or a regional joke, but an official part of the Viking week. Laugardagr eventually became the English word Saturday, though you might not have guessed its roots were soaked in steam and scrubbing. For the Norse, this wasn't a casual tradition. It was a weekly ritual practically sacred in its regularity. Everyone bathed on Saturdays. Not just warriors or nobles, but shepherds, merchants, and even the neighborhood troublemaker who only owned one shirt. You shuffle along a path of mossy stones, still warm from passing feet. It's early yet, but already there's movement in the village. Children fetch buckets of lake water, their tiny arms straining. An elder stokes the fire under a hollowed-out log basin. The air smells of damp wool and birch smoke, an olfactory calendar reminder that Saturday has arrived. The communal bathhouse, or rather the communal bath area, might be no more than a circle of logs and heated stones covered with a canvas tarp or a roof of thatch. Some villages had more elaborate arrangements. In Iceland, for instance, natural hot springs were diverted with stone walls to create permanent public baths. Archaeological remains near Reykjavik even suggest heated floors. In some areas, though, scholars debate whether those were for comfort or preservation. There's an odd sort of accountability to it all. To skip your Saturday bath isn't just lazy, it's rude. It implies disrespect for your peers, poor preparation for the coming week, or perhaps even an unsound mind. Chronic unwashedness could get you labeled as trollish or worse, cursed. Some sagas feature characters who refuse to bathe, and those characters rarely meet happy ends. That's the paradox. In a culture often romanticized as brutal, chaotic, or uncivilized, bathing was a form of order. It marked the rhythm of life, like harvesting or mead making. And because it was predictable, it became a form of soft power. If you were clean on Saturday, people assumed you were reliable. If you weren't, they might wonder what else you neglected: your oaths, your debts, your sword practice. Some Viking laws even included cleanliness clauses. Before a public assembly or thing, it was expected that all participants would arrive freshly bathed and combed. Imagine that a society where bathing wasn't vanity, but civic duty. The children finish their water run laughing as they splash each other. One slips on a flat stone and lands with a harmless plop. An old man chuckles and offers a hand. No one yells. It's bathing day, there's nothing to hurry. Later, as the steam curls up from the stones and the first group settles into their weekly soak, you begin to understand why Saturday mattered. Not for superstition, not for scent, but for the quiet dignity of feeling clean together. There's a scent in the air now, damp moss-smoked wood, and the tang of mineral-rich steam, and a low hum of voices rising from the pit. But step back from the warmth and imagine for a moment what outsiders might think. To someone from modern-day Finland or a sleek Nordic spa retreat, these Viking bath pits might look like rustic relics. But the comparison is misleading. The Viking sauna wasn't designed for luxury. It was closer in spirit to a smokehouse. Only this time, you're the cured meat. The steam structure you approach isn't windowed candlelit or filled with eucalyptus mist. It's a sunken chamber dug into the earth and framed with stones. Above it, wooden planks and turf form a roof, sometimes with a hole for smoke to escape or not. The result? A space where fire is lit directly on the floor, allowed to billow and saturate the chamber in a thick, hot fog. After hours of heating, the fire is extinguished, the smoke cleared mostly, and the room becomes a steamy, soot-stained cave. This is what scholars call a svarthus, a black house. It's part sauna, part shelter, part furnace, and entirely Viking. And while it shares DNA with modern sauna culture, it serves different ends. Cleanliness, yes, but also spiritual readiness, community, even healing. You duck inside and feel the heat cling to your eyelashes. It's dark, only slits of light from above. Around you, silhouettes move quietly. No music, no whisper of aromatherapy oils. Just breath steam and the creak of sweat-damp wood. Someone pours water over a pile of fire-blackened stones, and the hiss that follows sounds like a dragon sighing. Some archaeologists debate whether these black houses were used exclusively for bathing. There's evidence, in fact, that they doubled as smokehouses or even childbirth chambers. A few charred bones and amulets have sparked theories of ritual use, and in one case, a series of rune-carved stones suggest that the steam pits may have hosted sacrifices, animal, not human. Probably. What's certain is that these spaces were far more than functional. They were liminal threshold zones between dirty and clean, public and private, natural and mystical. In the Viking worldview, steam didn't just purify the skin, it purified intent. Warriors emerged feeling readied, not just rinsed, and the pain of the heat, the stinging smoke. These were trials. To endure them was to assert your place among the living, the clean, the civilized. You sit cross-legged on a log, sweat running like rivulets. The walls glisten with condensed vapor, reflecting your neighbors like watery ghosts. A woman beside you hums a lullaby, half forgotten. Across the room, a child draws in the soot with a wet fingertip. There's no shame in nakedness here, just familiarity. Outside, the wind picks up. The smoke hole whistles faintly, and someone adds more water to the stones. You brace yourself for the next wave of heat. The next gust of steam rolls through like a warm, invisible tide, and not a single soul flinches. It's as if your fellow bathers have grown gills for heat. You're surrounded now, shoulder to shoulder, with people of all ages, shapes, and social stations. A bearded trader with silver beads in his hair leans back beside a stoic grandmother whose only adornment is a carved wooden comb. Across from them, two children giggle their laughter, bouncing off the smoke-darkened walls. This isn't awkward. It isn't provocative. It's just normal. Welcome to the unfiltered intimacy of communal Viking bathing. Unlike modern spas with gender-segregated hours and hush luxury Viking bath culture, was astonishingly casual about bodies and boundaries. Men, women, and children often bathed together without fanfare or discomfort. Cleanliness was a shared priority, and the act of bathing was more logistical than symbolic. You got hot, you got sweaty, you rinsed. That was it. No mirrors, no shame, no whispered judgments behind linen towels. Of course, surviving records don't spell out every detail. Some sagas depict bathhouses as mixed gender and family-centered, while others imply that noble women had separate quarters, especially during rituals or high-status gatherings. Scholars still puzzle over whether these differences reflected personal preference, regional variation, or evolving taboos over time. What's not up for debate is how communal these routines were. In many villages, there was only one bathing structure. If you waited for privacy, you'd never get clean. And so, like the shared mead cup or the village bread oven, the bathhouse became another commons. A place to chat to, rest to swap news, or gently roast your cousin about his ill-fated sheep trade. You glance around again. The atmosphere feels closer to a living room than a locker room. Two young women braid each other's damp hair, while a burly man scrubs his arms with a bundle of reeds. A pair of teenagers sneak in a bottle of early mead, and are promptly scolded not for the drink, but for forgetting to rinse their feet first. Decency, after all, had its rules, and yet those rules weren't about covering up. They were about respect. You respected the space, the ritual, and the people beside you. Gossip was welcome, but mockery was not. And the man who tried to make bathing lewd or showy, he'd find himself very alone, very fast. In one preserved Icelandic folk tale, a woman curses a suitor not for his forwardness, but because he never bathed on Saturday. That kind of neglect, she says, was a sign of rot in the soul. Harsh, maybe, but in a land where neighbors shared everything from bathwater to burial plots, cleanliness wasn't just about health, it was social currency. Back in the steam, someone breaks into a ballad soft, rhythmic, the kind that tells of sea journeys and jealous gods. The room stills as if honoring an old friend. Naked or not, you feel part of something older than modesty. A moment of shared humanity in the haze. The steam begins to thin, revealing the glowing red of fire-warmed stones stacked carefully in the corner. You watch as a youth barefoot soot-faced uses long wooden tongs to reposition the rocks, then tosses in a fresh bundle. There's no iron cauldron here, no metal tub bubbling away. Instead, Vikings relied on something older, more elemental firestone and time. So, how exactly did they heat all that water? The process was elegant in its simplicity. First, they gathered dense stones from riverbed stones that wouldn't crack under sudden heat. These were placed into roaring fires for hours until they glowed from within. Once red hot, they were transferred using long poles or leather gloves into dugout basins or hollowed wooden logs filled with cold water. The result? Hissing, steaming baths without ever needing a forge or kettle. If that sounds precarious, it was. A misplaced rock could crack the basin. Too much heat could scald the skin. But generations of trial and error had taught the Norse how to balance it. They knew which stones exploded, which woods warped, and how many buckets of lake water were needed to cool a bath just enough. Interestingly, not every bath used water directly. Some bathers simply sat in steam pits, letting the moisture and heat work their magic without a single drop touching skin. This was especially common in the dead of winter, when hauling water through waist-deep snow was less appealing than sweating in a dry hole lined with birch bark. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how standardized these heating techniques were. Some evidence suggests regional preferences. Coastal communities, for instance, favored sea stone steam pits, while inland villagers leaned toward carved log tubs. Others argue it was simply a matter of resources, whatever could be built and heated with the materials at hand. You shift on your wooden seat as another rock lands with a deep plunk steam roaring upward like a sudden storm. Someone opens a vent in the roof, and a shaft of cold air cuts through, swirling the fog into ghostly tendrils. It's easy to forget in this enveloping heat how cold the outside world really is, but you hear it in the wind that howls just beyond the walls. Heating bathwater wasn't just about hygiene, it was survival. A warm soak meant thawed fingers, loosened joints, and the absence of frostbite. For the elderly or injured, it could mean the difference between another week of work or a slow fade into winter silence. A boy nearby tests the water with a cautious toe, then grins and slides in. His laughter echoes, and a woman nearby rolls her eyes with a smile, muttering something about fire-footed fools. Still, she lowers herself in right after him. As the steam thickens again, you begin to understand why Vikings put so much effort into their primitive baths. Not just for cleanliness, not even for comfort, but for the ritual of transforming a few rocks, a little fire, and some patience into warmth you could share. The scent changes before you even notice the motion. A snap of damp wood, the crackle of a bundle unfolding, and suddenly the air fills with something sharper, greener, almost sweet. Birch. Not the kind you plant in gardens or admire in autumn, but wild, flexible branches bundled tight and still damp with morning dew. In Viking baths, birch wasn't decoration. It was your loofah, your soap, and sometimes your cologne. You're handed a branch thick with leaves and told to slap it lightly against your arms. Not in anger, more like coaxing your skin awake. The practice is called vita, or vasta, in later Finnish traditions. And while Vikings didn't record the term themselves, archaeological hints and written sagas suggest similar routines. The light whipping stimulates circulation, opens pores, and releases the branch's fragrant oils, which cling to warm skin like nature's body spray. Modern science has since confirmed what Vikings only guessed: birch oil contains methyl salicylate, a natural compound with antiseptic and anti-inflammatory properties. In other words, they weren't just slapping leaves around for fun, it was a form of gentle cleansing. And in the absence of soap, this mattered more than you'd think. You look around watching others perform the dance. A pair of elderly men lean forward, striking each other's backs with slow, rhythmic flicks. A teenage girl swats her brother with theatrical glee until their mother raises an eyebrow. The room smells like forest now, earthy crisp and oddly energizing. Some bathers chew on birch twigs as they sit, not for sustenance, but for fresh breath and oral hygiene. Others toss the leaves into the steaming rocks, infusing the chamber with an even thicker aroma. In some regions, they added juniper or yarrow for variety. The bath became an apothecary, each branch its own vial of scent and salve. There's limited consensus on whether specific rituals accompanied the birch whipping. A few sagas hint at songs, incantations, or even light choreography passed down from mothers to daughters. But the scholarly record is thin, and most theories rest on oral tradition rather than hard evidence. Some historians believe the birch practice may have had spiritual overtones, part of a cleansing not just of the body, but of misfortune, envy, or illness. Others insist it was pure practicality. After all, when your only soap is a tree, you learn to use it well. You give your own arm a cautious tap, then another. It stings, but not badly. Like the pinch of a good memory, a fine red flush rises along your forearm, and the scent wraps around you like a cloak. Outside, the birch trees sway in the wind, their white bark glowing under a gray sky. You imagine someone centuries ago gathering these same branches, not with reverence, but with familiarity, like picking herbs for stew or wool for spinning. Just another step in the week's rhythm. The branch softens in your grip. Someone offers you another. You take it and begin again. You spot it in a wooden bowl, cloudy yellowish and unmistakably pungent. Someone stirs it with a carved ladle, not flinching at the smell. You've bathed in steam, whipped yourself with birch, and now it's time for lye and urine. Yes, really. Viking cleanliness didn't stop at a good soak. It dove headfirst into chemistry of the medieval unfiltered kind. Let's begin with the basic soap, as we know it wasn't widely used in Viking Age Scandinavia. Instead, Vikings relied on what they could ferment, distill, and scrape from the earth. Chief among these blodlauger, a form of lye made by pouring water through ashes from hardwood fires. The resulting alkaline liquid was harsh but effective, especially for laundering clothes and degreasing hair. Then came the twist. To make it stronger, they sometimes added stale urine. This wasn't a prank or a punishment, it was science. Urine contains ammonia, and when aged, it becomes a potent cleaning agent. Combined with wood ash lye, it created a surprisingly effective, if smelly, solution for whitening linen and degreasing oily hair. You might recoil, but to the Vikings it was no worse than sour milk or fish paste, just another tool in the domestic toolkit. There's evidence that women often handled this part of the household ritual. Urine would be collected over days, stored in the animal bladders or wooden casks, then used for scrubbing clothes on flat stones or soaking flax fibers for weaving. Hair washing with lye was less frequent, maybe once a month, but when it happened, it was thorough. A long soak, a scalp massage, and a rinse in cold lake water. The result? Straw-colored Viking hair that sometimes gleamed nearly white. Some scholars suggest this practice wasn't just about hygiene. It may have held aesthetic or even symbolic value. Lighter hair in Norse mythology often aligned with beauty, nobility, or divine favor. There's ongoing debate about how intentional this bleaching effect was, or whether it was simply a side effect of the available materials. You watch as someone dips their comb into the lye mixture, then runs it slowly through a tangle of damp hair. A grimace, then a sigh. It burns slightly, but the grit begins to lift. Another bather rinses a tunic in a similar bowl, scrubbing it between stones until the water runs darker. The smell is pervasive, but no one complains. Instead, a kind of silent ritual unfolds. Comb dip rinse, rub soak ring. It's rhythmic, almost hypnotic, and as unpleasant as the ingredients might sound, the results speak for themselves. Viking combs dozens have been found in graves suggest that personal grooming was taken seriously. Lice combs, beard combs, even travel-sized ones made from bone or antler. Cleanliness, it seems, traveled with you. You tentatively sniff your own damp hair, uncertain whether you've been purified or pickled. A child nearby snorts with laughter. Welcome to Viking hygiene, surprisingly scientific, delightfully disgusting, and strangely effective. The steam may have faded, but the mirror work has only just begun. In the corner of the bathhouse, a group gathers around a low bench. No candles, no silvered glass, just fingers, combs, and careful braids. Viking grooming didn't end with washing. It bloomed into an entire ritual of hair braiding, beard oiling, and ornamental pride. You settle beside a pair of women, twisting each other's hair into rope-like strands. Their fingers move quickly, confidently, even playfully. Overhead, someone chuckles at a crooked braid. A redo begins without insult. This isn't vanity, it's expression. In Norse society, your hair wasn't just a feature, it was a canvas. Men take their turn too. One dips a carved comb into water, draws it slowly through a thick beard, and ties the bottom with a leather cord. Another weaves small bone beads into his side braids. These aren't costumes. These are identifiers, marks of clan status, or even recent travels. Historical texts and sagas are full of hair references. Warriors like Harold Fairhair were known by name for their grooming. The legendary Egil Skallagrimsson was described as having unruly wolfish hair, a feature that mirrored his tempestuous soul. And though the exact styles varied across regions and centuries, the emphasis on tidiness, adornment, and upkeep was constant. One peculiar detail: many combs were worn on the body, dangling from belts or tucked into boots. A practical choice, definitely. But also a sign to others: I care how I appear. I prepare for battle, for speech, for story. Some scholars debate whether these grooming rituals held deeper ceremonial weight. Were certain braids reserved for mourning? Were beads symbols of oaths or tokens from lovers? The archaeological record hints but does not confirm. What we do know: Viking Age combs were everywhere, found in graves and latrine pits, even in battlefields. Some carved from antler, others from imported ivory. A few were inscribed with runes, blessings, insults, even jokes. One fragment from Denmark simply reads, "Comb me and you'll be wise," possibly the oldest self-help advice ever written. A boy nearby frowns into his reflection, a copper dish filled with water. His older sister leans in to adjust his braid, adding a small wooden bead. His cheeks flush, but he doesn't pull away. Around them, the room feels like a backstage dressing tent before a grand performance. You join the rhythm, running your fingers through your own damp hair. A nearby elder offers a comb carved from bone, its handle shaped like a serpent. As you draw it through your hair, a fine static crackle sparks along your scalp. Not unpleasant, just ancient. It's easy to imagine a raiding crew, freshly bathed, stepping from the steam, with gleaming hair and proud beards. Not just clean, but styled, adorned, and in their own way, armored. The battlefield may come later. For now, the only war is between a knot and a comb. You feel a tug. Then release. The braid takes shape. The look of a Viking is never accidental. The line between man and woman seems to blur in the rising steam. Across from you, a tall figure with braided hair helps an older man settle into the water. To your left, two teenagers, one with earrings, one with a sword, callous gossip, softly their laughter punctuated by splashes. And no one bats an eye. In the Viking bathhouse, roles weren't rigid. Cleanliness belonged to everyone, and the rules of gender, more fluid than you might expect. The modern idea of strictly segregated bathing doesn't quite apply here. While some bathhouses across history, Roman, Japanese, Ottoman, developed formal separation between men and women, Viking sources tell a messier, more flexible story. Families often bathed together, so did neighbors, and while local customs varied, the notion of shared space wasn't inherently controversial. Instead, behavior mattered more than biology. You shift as someone enters behind you, a woman with strong arms and a scar across her chin. She nods politely, dips her birch bundle in the water, and takes a seat beside a wiry man who's currently humming to himself. They don't speak, but the comfort in their shared silence is telling. There's no tension here, just bodies, heat, and routine. Of course, surviving records aren't perfect. The sagas, often written down centuries later, tend to focus on heroes and drama, not hygiene logistics. But scattered references suggest that bathing wasn't policed along hard gender lines. In fact, several tales describe men and women sharing bath spaces during festivals, pre-wedding ceremonies, and even after battles. One Icelandic text casually mentions a woman braiding a warrior's hair after a soak, with no indication that her presence was unusual. Some historians argue this points to a more progressive view of gender in Viking society, at least within certain bounds. Others caution against overreading. The flexibility, they say, may have been practical rather than philosophical. If you lived in a small settlement with one bath area and short summers enforcing strict separations, simply wasn't feasible. Still, there's something unmistakably egalitarian in the way everyone moves. A child rinses his grandfather's back. A woman offers her birch bundle to a young man with an arm in a sling. You're reminded not of luxury spas, but of ancient kitchens, crowded, communal, and full of quiet cooperation. One oddity: some burial sites contain grooming tools traditionally associated with the opposite gender. Male graves with bead-studded combs, female graves with razors and beard oil containers. Were these gifts, family heirlooms, personal identifiers? No consensus yet, but the artifacts hint at individual choice in grooming, regardless of gender norms. Back in the bathhouse, the steam thickens again, erasing edges. You can't tell who's who anymore, not by face, not by shape, only by motion, rhythm, familiarity. The scraping of a comb, the splash of water poured with care, the unspoken understanding that in this space every body is just that, a body. And in the Viking world, to be clean wasn't to be masculine or feminine. It was to be prepared, presentable, and alive. The bath didn't judge, it welcomed. You sit now in a quieter corner of the bathhouse, the steam gentler, the conversation hushed. Around you faces glow with warmth, some flushed from heat, others from satisfaction, and something clicks. This wasn't just a weekly rinse. In Viking society, being clean meant being respected. Grime wasn't just inconvenient, it was social kryptonite. Across the Norse world, appearance mattered deeply. A well-groomed beard, neatly braided hair, and freshly washed clothes didn't just make you pleasant company. They marked you as someone who belonged, someone trustworthy, someone competent. And those who neglected hygiene, they were marked too, sometimes literally. In one saga, a man is insulted not for cowardice, but for smelling like a sheep left in rain. Ouch. Archaeologists have found grooming kits in dozens of graves, from wealthy warriors to modest farmers. Tweezers, ear spoons, razors, and combs were as common as weapons. One grave in Sweden included a miniature mirror framed in bronze, no glass, just polished metal, but clearly used. These weren't luxuries. They were expected. Social status didn't determine whether you bathed it, determined how often and how thoroughly. The wealthy might have their own private steam huts, access to finer birch oils, or even imported grooming tools. The poor bathed communally sometimes, only when Saturday rolled around. But everyone bathed. To avoid it altogether was to risk being labeled unclean, not just in body, but in spirit. There's a curious detail from a medieval English monk who described Norse visitors to his region as excessively vain because they bathed weekly, combed their hair daily, and changed their linen often. To him, it was suspicious. To the locals, perhaps threatening. After all, who could compete with a Viking who showed up to raid looking like he'd just left a day's spa? Some scholars argue that cleanliness was wielded as a kind of soft power. A polished warrior seemed more formidable, a fragrant trader more persuasive. Even marriages were affected. Cleanliness made for better courtship, better alliances. There are verses that read more like medieval Tinder bios. He came to her clean with comb in hand. One overlooked custom hosting. If a guest arrived at your home, it was proper to offer them water to wash their hands and face. Some households even kept a guest comb, shared yes, but maintained. Hospitality began not with food, but with freshening up. A host who failed to offer this was considered crude. A guest who declined, suspicious. Back in the bathhouse, an elder adjusts her tunic and smooths her silver-streaked braid. She walks with a straight back, radiating dignity. You notice how others part for her slightly without needing to be asked. Cleanliness in this moment reads as command. You dip your hands into the warm water one last time, watching it ripple outward. Dirt floats away, but something else remains. Presence, poise, respect. You may not have gold rings or a long ship, but right now you are gleaming, and that in Viking eyes makes all the difference. A quiet hush falls over the bathhouse. The laughter fades, replaced by murmurs, then silence. You glance around and notice a shift subtle but unmistakable. Posture straightens, eyes sharpen. There's a tension in the air like flint waiting for spark. Bathing wasn't just for comfort. In the Viking world, it was also for battle. You might picture warriors leaping from long ships cloaked in blood and sea spray too feral for grooming. But many sagas tell a different tale, one of warriors who bathed the night before a raid. Not to pamper themselves, but to prepare. Clean-skinned combed hair and braided beards weren't vanity. They were armor, a signal that you entered the fray as a complete and composed being, not a beast. You sit beside one such warrior now, his hair tied high, his arms still steaming. He sharpens a blade casually on a whetstone, humming under his breath. Every so often he dips his fingers into a birch oil mixture and massages his forearms. It smells sharp medicinal, not perfume preparation. There's debate among historians about whether this pre-battle bathing was ritual or routine. Some argue it was spiritual washing away doubt, fear, or bad omens. Others think it was purely practical soothed muscles, clearer heads, and a morale boost. But even the skeptics agree, clean warriors made a statement. A man who took time to braid his beard before swinging an axe showed discipline, not weakness. One saga recounts a Viking leader who bathed before a duel, refusing to meet his opponent unclean and unfinished. His hair was bound with red ribbon, his nails trimmed. He lost the fight, but gained eternal style points. Some versions say his opponent hesitated, unnerved by his opponent's poise. In a world without uniforms, appearance was messaging. A clean tunic, polished shield, and freshly groomed beard said, "I respect the fight. I've come prepared." It also served a darker function. To bathe before battle was to accept your possible death and choose to face it with dignity. Across the room, younger warriors check their gear. One tightens the knot in his hair, another oils his boots. They are not speaking, but their movements speak volumes. Even the act of bathing together shoulder to shoulder becomes a bonding ritual. Stripped of armor, they are equals for a moment, vulnerable, honest. You dip your own hands in a nearby basin, watching how the water reflects torchlight. In this space, before the clash of steel cleanliness becomes a kind of clarity. You are not hiding beneath mud or bravado. You are exposed, ready. And when they rise, these quiet, gleaming warriors, they carry more than weapons. They carry intention. You feel it in their stillness, the calm before chaos. The belief that to meet fate freshly bathed is to meet it on your terms. The door opens. Cold air floods in. They move out slowly, purposefully, like a tide rolling to shore. You sit in the steam they've left behind, the silence humming like an omen. The cold arrives like a slap sharp, immediate, and all-consuming. You step outside, breath catching in your throat, and suddenly the bathhouse feels like a lost dream. Snow crunches underfoot, and the wind carries the bite of deep winter. But even now, in the season when frost eats at doors and lake ice thickens like glass, Vikings still bathed. They just had to break through it first. Welcome to the ice bath, the final frontier of Norse hygiene. It's not a poetic metaphor. It's a literal slab of frozen lake, hacked open with axes, its dark water waiting below like a dare. You approach the edge where a hole has been carved into the ice. Around it, steam rises faintly where heat meets sheer, unrelenting cold. Two men strip down without ceremony. One utters a low grunt, then plunges in. A second later, he surfaces gasping, but grinning hair clinging to his face like wet rope. He scrambles out and is wrapped in wool skin, pink and alive. The entire ordeal lasts seconds, but the look in his eyes, victorious. Vikings didn't ice bathe daily, it was more seasonal necessity than routine indulgence. Still, for those living near lakes or fjords, it was sometimes the only option in winter. Hauling water for steam baths wasn't always feasible when snowdrifts stood taller than your goats. So you cracked the ice, took a deep breath, and went in. Some sagas describe winter bathing as a test of courage. Others mention warriors who refused to bathe before battle unless it involved ice, as if cold water granted sharper instincts. There's scholarly disagreement over how common this was. Some argue it was rare and ceremonial. Others believe it was more widespread among coastal dwellers. One curious note, there are accounts of special stones or iron tools used to keep bathing holes open. Families would share access, often bathing in turns, and the youngest children went last to warm their feet in the spots where adults had already broken through. The air here is brutally dry. Your nostrils sting. But the community around the ice hole works like a well-oiled machine. Blankets are warmed by fires. Wooden clogs rest near the edge to prevent slipping. One older woman dips her hands in for just a moment, then quickly rubs them with birch oil. She chuckles softly and mutters, "Colder than hell's heart." You inch closer, trying to decide if you're bold or simply foolish. A man beside you, towel draped over his shoulder, nudges with a grin. "Just think of it as proof you're alive," he says. Then he jumps. Water sloshes, ice groans, and laughter breaks across the snow like firelight. Despite the cold, there's something deeply warm in it, all this shared madness, this battle against winter's grip. You take a breath, hold it, and step forward. Not because it's fun, not because it's comfortable, but because, like the Vikings, you understand now to stay clean in winter wasn't just hygiene, it was defiance. The fire crackles low as you huddle back inside, wool draped over your shoulders, skin tingling from the cold. Someone passes you a cup of warm mead, and you sip it slowly, the sweetness anchoring you. But the warmth isn't just in the drink. It's in the knowledge, the quiet satisfaction that you now know something most people don't. The Vikings weren't dirty. It's a myth persistent and popular that Vikings stank, that they reveled in filth, their braids matted their clothes stiff with grime. Films and novels love to show them as mud-covered beasts roaring through fog and fire with the hygiene of wild boars. But dig a little deeper into soil sagas and burial sites, and a different picture emerges. Archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of grooming tools from Viking-era settlements. Not just combs, but tweezers, razors, ear spoons, and even tiny shears. These weren't ceremonial artifacts. They were worn daily, tucked into belts or pouches like a phone in a back pocket. A man without a comb might as well walk into battle without a shield. And yet, the myth persists. Partly due to the accounts of their enemies, especially Anglo-Saxon monks who seemed both fascinated and horrified by Norse grooming habits. One famously wrote that Viking men used their beauty and cleanliness to seduce local women, calling them effeminate for bathing every Saturday. The insult was meant to sting, but in hindsight, it sounds more like admiration with a sprinkle of jealousy. Even modern scholarship has played a role in muddying the waters. Early 20th century historians often emphasized Viking violence, treating hygiene as an afterthought or irrelevant detail. Only recently have researchers begun highlighting the daily life aspects, bathing, grooming, and the social importance of appearing well kept. There's another layer to the myth Hollywood. Films and shows have cast Vikings in perpetual filth, equating dirt with authenticity, as if being clean somehow dulls their edge. But no matter how gritty the image, it's far from the archaeological truth. You glance around the bathhouse. The people here aren't grunting savages. They're thoughtful, careful, and meticulous. One woman threads beads into her braid with surgical precision. A man shapes his beard into twin spirals, muttering a chant under his breath. Even the children still damp from a plunge are being combed and oiled. Some scholars remain puzzled by how such a well-documented aspect of Norse culture, its emphasis on grooming, was erased so thoroughly from public memory. Was it cultural bias? Christian smear campaigns? The romanticization of barbarism? Probably all of the above. But here in the haze of steam and the glow of firelight, the truth feels tangible. Cleanliness wasn't an afterthought. It was part of identity. To be dirty was to be outcast. To be clean was to be seen by God's kin and enemies alike. You wrap your cloak tighter, the mead warming your chest. Let the myths rot in the cold. You've soaked in the truth, and it smells faintly of birch and steam. The fire dims to embers, and yet the evening isn't over. Someone reaches for a wooden pail resting in the corner, its contents murky used and unmistakably bathwater. You expect it to be dumped out perhaps onto a snowbank or garden plot. Instead, it's ladled carefully into a smaller bowl and carried into the shadows. Not for cleaning, for magic. Yes, magic. In Viking lore, bathwater wasn't just wastewater. Once it had touched your body, your sweat, your breath, it took on something more personal, something potent. And for those who knew how to wield it, it became a conduit for spells, charms, and eerie rituals passed down in hushed tones. Folk traditions speak of lager, or bath leavings used in love magic. A maiden might collect the water, used by a man, she fancied then pour it into the earth beneath his threshold, hoping to bind his affection. Others used it for protection, mixing it with herbs and blood, then sprinkling it at the edge of a property to ward off ill fortune. You watch as a woman, older eyes clouded, but hands steady, stirs her bowl with a carved wand. She whispers softly, lips barely moving. Around her others avert their gaze out of respect or superstition. This isn't entertainment. This is serious business. Some sagas make vague reference to these rituals, especially in the hands of velour female seers, who blended herbal knowledge, chant, and symbolic action. A few even describe bathwater being saved from warriors before battle then poured into fire as an offering to the gods. Scholars still argue whether these stories reflect actual practice or mythologized memory. But the consistency of the theme bathwater as spiritually charged is hard to ignore. One curious account from a 10th century text tells of a mother who used her child's bathwater to read omens. She watched the way the steam curled, how bubbles rose, and even how fast the water cooled. The results were interpreted as signs of the child's future strength or misfortune. Was it superstition, desperation, perhaps both? Back near the steam pit, another ritual unfolds. A younger man dips his fingers into a bowl of reused water, then brushes them across a small charm at his neck, a carved bit of bone shaped like Thor's hammer. He doesn't speak, but his hands tremble slightly. Maybe it's faith, maybe just the cold. There's a strange poetry in it all. Water that once carried dirt and sweat now becomes a vessel for hope, longing, fear. It transforms from the mundane to the mystical, not by being pure, but by being personal. Some traditions even warned against disposing of bathwater carelessly. Doing so could let someone use it against you. A curse cast through your own filth, turned backward like a mirror in fog. The fire flares suddenly catching dry bark. You blink and the woman with the bowl is gone. Only the steam lingers curling like a whispered promise in the air. The coals have burned low, the steam now only a mist, and one by one the bathers have begun to drift away. Some wrap themselves in thick woolen cloaks, others tug on fur-lined boots with practiced fingers. The hush that follows isn't empty, it's satisfied. The kind of silence that comes after something shared and sacred. After the bath, the world softens. You sit on a bench near the wall, still warm from fire-heated stone. Someone hands you a cup, mead golden and spice just strong enough to fog the edges of your thoughts. It tastes like honey and smoke, like something old and sweet and earned. Outside, snowflakes fall in slow spirals, but inside, the heat still lingers. Post-bathing rituals varied by village, but one thing remained consistent: you didn't rush. Rewrapping in wool wasn't just about warmth. It was a signal to the body that the ceremony was complete, a transition from heat to hearth. Some laid by the fire for a while, combing out their beards or untangling braids. Others sipped quietly, watching sparks pop against the stone. You run your fingers through your damp hair, now free of grit and wildness. Someone nearby sings an old tune, low, rhythmic, probably older than the building itself. It's about a long ship and a storm, but the melody is more lullaby than ballad. No one claps. No one comments. It simply drifts across the room like steam. Interestingly, some bathhouses doubled as rest lodges, especially in winter. Furs were spread across benches and weary bodies curled into the residual heat. People talked in hushed tones or fell asleep, entirely lulled by the scent of birch and wool. The bathhouse became not just a place of cleansing, but of dreaming. There's historical debate about what happened after large communal baths. Some sagas mention feasts, others speak of quiet meditations, or even nighttime ceremonies under the moon. But one thing's certain for the Vikings: bathing was never isolated from the rest of life. It flowed into food, into rest, into stories, told beside crackling hearths. A boy near the doorway clutches a wooden comb carved with runes. He offers it to an elder, who nods once solemnly and begins slowly grooming his beard. Not a gesture of vanity, a ritual of care, a quiet passing of memory through touch. Outside, the snow has thickened. It muffles the world turns footsteps into whispers. You rise, cloak drawn tight, the last of your mead warming your belly. A few coals still glow behind you, faint but steady. A reminder that the warmth lives on even after the steam fades. As you step into the cold, something follows you. Not just heat, not just scent, but a sense of calm. You've seen the Vikings not as barbarians, but as humans, proud, clean, and gentle in their rituals. The bath may be over, but the story lingers curling around your thoughts like rising mist. Now, go comb the ice from your beard. Wrap yourself in wool, and let the quiet finish what the heat began. Let everything slow now. Let the cold become distant, the warmth remembered only as a weight behind your eyes. You've walked among steam and stone laughter, and silence watched water change form and meaning. You've seen warriors soften elders cared for, and magic stirred from something as simple as a bucket of bathwater. You're not meant to remember every name or detail, only the feeling of community, of care, of ancient heat, wrapping itself around cold bones. Let your thoughts float now, unbraiding like hair in warm water. If this story helped you feel calm, a little cleaner, in spirit, maybe drift back again sometime. Quietly, of course,